Hi, everybody. Thanks, Tia. Thank you, Navtej. Okay, so I actually thought that I would start before I speak with something that I wrote in one of the many notebooks that I've kept through the many years that I've been doing the practice. I wrote this actually last year, and I thought I'd read it, and I'll read a few more entries as I go along. So it's a little bit of a journey, maybe. So this is 27th May 2019. It says, Yoga Retreat to Kangra, start of an important journey in 2019. Where in the body does laughter come from? The body is the medium, and the medium is the message. I'm Simrat. My journey to somatics has been really interesting because I come from the visual arts and not really the performing arts. I used to work at Khoj International Artists Association, and right besides Khoj was Gati. And, I started casually taking dance classes and really enjoyed movement. So that was in 2012. So slowly I found over the years what was happening was that I was actually engaging in movement and movement practices just because I was interested in it. And I didn't really come at it from a performance or a performative viewpoint. So actually, when I started doing the somatic practice, I had been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is a martial art form, for almost 3 years at that point of time. And it was actually a very interesting move because Jiu-Jitsu is very aggressive, and it's very much like rough and tough kind of martial art. And then I entered this somatic practice, which was extremely gentle and required a completely different kind of entry point into movement. So when I went into somatics, actually didn't really go into it with any kind of idea of what I wanted from it or what it was. I just did it because someone had suggested that I try it out. And what I found when I started to train the somatic practice is actually that somatics is a very deep and complex practice. Specifically the Abhyas somatic practice, because there are several different kinds of somatic practices, and many dancers and theater performers would perhaps be familiar with it, although somatics is not just the domain of performance. It has many more applications, and there are many different kinds of somatic practices. But in Abhyas somatics, I found a really deep and complex practice that is actually really layered and over time becomes extremely nuanced, although, it's nuanced from the start as well. If I were to describe it briefly in a sentence, or I would say that it's training in sensitivity or bodily sensitivity, which becomes emotional sensitivity and even to some extent a kind of spiritual or existential sensitivity. So when you practice somatics, I would say in a way you kind of become more alive to your body, more alive to yourself, and more alive to the world. And I think one of the things that really drew me to this practice, and even the Abhyas, Studio Abhyas yoga practice, is this idea that, which is a very core idea or principle, that the body has a kind of innate knowledge that's not accessible necessarily through speech or through thinking or through words. It's a knowledge that can only be arrived at through a kind of reciprocal engagement with the body. So you have to meet the body in a way where you're able to talk to it, you're able to listen to it, you're able to see it, and enter into a conversation with it where your ideas of what it is, or even what your body wants, because the body has its own set of desires, as Jia was mentioning earlier, where they're able to meet in the middle. So it's not that one is, stronger than the other. In the world we live in, it tends to be much more mind over body. But then the flip of that could be that the body also, in many moments in your life, you might find that the body becomes stronger than the mind. But what I find that this practice is like a very fine-tuned calibration in having a conversation with each other, so that you become a more whole or full self, full you. So it's not that your body and mind are separated. It's not even that. It's kind of that they work in tandem with each other. So that said, I thought I would start by reading a couple of entries that I had made, including the very first one. which was on the 1st of November in 2016. First session was strange. I really made an effort to turn my mind off and follow my body. I didn't stop myself from thinking, but at some point was able to observe my thoughts as they floated by. I found that my body was making shapes based on what felt tight, on what felt like it needed to be stretched. I especially found myself stretching to release my neck on the left side and my right groin. When we were done, it took me a while to adjust my eyes and ears. I felt like I went into sensory overload. Nothing was computing. The words were being said and I understood them, but they didn't resonate the way they normally do. But they were understood. I also had a very distinct sense of my body. In fact, I felt the mass of it, I think, for the first time. At first, I would have described the feeling as I felt like a rock, but that's not right. It's not as if I was unshakable. But I did suddenly have a distinct feeling of the mass of my body, maybe even the weight of it. As a last note, I didn't feel happy or cheery. I felt odd, like a bit disoriented even. Not sure if that sounds bad. I didn't feel unsafe or bad, but I felt odd. And once I got up, I felt like I had to move. Somewhere, I felt a sense of unease because of the power I suddenly felt in my body, actually, as if I shouldn't have it or as if it were wrong to feel. 11th December 2016. Today, Navtej had us align and do yoga. I got that dizzy, heady feeling when I hooked under my ribs and lifted up. It was like there was suddenly too much breath in my body. I always feel weird in this class. Maybe it's the feeling of release, of lack of effort or lightness that makes me uneasy. Am I so used to feeling bogged down? Then 16th September 2017. At the end of class today, my body feels alive. Simply alive. It's as if my body has been dead these past few months and now it's awake. I felt a distinct activation of my right wing muscle, and that muscle didn't activate on my left side as quickly. In fact, my right arm shoulder wing felt light, alive, and weightless, whereas it took a lot of effort for my left to even activate. Overall, at the end, I felt I relished all the activeness in my body, and I felt as if I literally generated energy that is traveling through me. It's like I have woken up. So right off the bat, I want to say that the somatic practice for me is a practice essentially of reorientation. And as I said, that this happens physically, but it also happens emotionally and at a different level, perhaps what I call spiritually or slightly existentially. But essentially what happened with me and what I think happens is that when you start engaging with your senses in the way that Gia was talking, how you see, how you listen, and how you feel, I think, most importantly. And when you turn that inwards and you start negotiating how you do that with yourself and your own body, I think there's a reorientation that happens, and it happens differently for different people because it's essentially a conversation that you enter with yourself. And so what happens is not only are you seeing, listening, and feeling, you're also like working with them individually, but also there's this calibration that happens very unconsciously and perhaps very slowly, where they kind of come into tune with each other. So the senses are not working individually and separately. When we work somatically, everything kind of comes into a focus. And as Gia said, there's a kind of gaze that develops, but it's not limited to the eyes. It travels further inside you. It's like an orientation that you have, that your body has and you have together, where the sensitivity, as I said, all the senses are heightened and become really sensitive. And so you're actually moving that way. So in the beginning, for me at least, it started with feeling like pain and discomfort and constrictions. And then slowly, it kind of eventually moved towards my emotional or mental reaction to the pains and the constrictions, and often unconscious like images or thoughts or old stories would come up. And what was really interesting about this practice is that in the way that we practice and the way that the practice is led, it's an exploration. So it's not like we're we know where we're going, and so you're actually surprised on every corner. Often, you'd find yourself moving your arm like this, and there'll be like a strange memory from when you were 6 that comes up. At least that's what happened with me. When you're on the ground, as Gia had described earlier, at the end of the session, there are many images that come to you. Feelings arise. And when I say feelings, I just want to distinguish here between the difference between a physical sensation, which is actually what feeling is, and also your perception of the feeling. So for me, the practice is very much about negotiating the relationship between the perception of the feeling and the physical feeling itself. So the reorientation happens very subtly and very slowly between the perception and the sensation as time goes by. And so essentially what happens is, by letting what is unseen, unheard, and unfelt in the body rise, you just start seeing differently, and you start listening differently, and you start feeling differently. And this actually carries forward outside of the class into the world. So essentially, I see this as a relational practice. I wanted to flag that because when we say we don't want to bring a preconceived idea to the body, like, it's very much about letting the body come into conversation. So it's not that I'm always open or that I'm always closed. The idea is about finding yourself in a situation where you can have that conversation. And when you participate in the world in that way, actually what happens is you get a deeper intimacy with your body, and you get a deeper intimacy in your relationships, because you're not arriving to the relationship with a preconceived idea. You're allowing speech to happen, you're allowing things to be seen, and you're receiving them without saying anything back until they fully reveal themselves to you. So there's a kind of responsiveness that happens between, your conscious self and your material self, which is your body. And so what happens when you're relational is that your experience of life actually just completely transforms. And so on that note, I wanted to read one or two more things that I said, because as I went along, I found in looking at my diaries in preparation for the webinar that the way I described things also changed. So today we began to talk about emotionality in class, and it was weird. It was the first time Navtesh brought up sadness. I think I identified the feeling I had in the last class as sadness, hollowness, or melancholia. He had us start with standing, which made me really, really anxious. My heart was hammering really, really fast. He wanted us to prepare to bend our knees, and all I wanted to do was bend them. I couldn't wait to do the exercise. And when we finally bent our knees, I went all the way to the floor. I just wanted my hammering heart to stop. I didn't want to feel faint anymore. He asked us what we felt when we finally went to the floor, and I think I thought there was an uneasy release. Again, I don't quite know how to pinpoint the feeling. The second set of exercises was about maintaining verticality, and I felt really light, buoyant, and free through the course of the exercise. And when he asked us how we felt when we reached the floor, I thought I felt reconciliation and then acceptance. And then I just want to read. So for me, actually, sadness was a big emotion that I had to deal with through the practice. And my relationship to sadness has completely changed. And I kind of had this aha moment in this yoga retreat that we did last year, which I'd mentioned right at the start of when I started speaking. And this is something I wrote at the end of the retreat. Every moment comes with loss, because you can never get it back again. And that is inherently sad. So we spend so much of our lives in sadness, and we don't even know it. We spend so much time trying to evade that sense of loss. We repeatedly try to find a feeling we experienced elsewhere in a new place. But that never works, because every moment is unique and different. So now I accept that loss, but I'm not scared of it, because I know that when I revisit a moment, I don't have to be scared. Because even if I lose a moment, I don't lose a feeling. I can always revisit that feeling somewhere else. So for me, I wanted to say a few more things, but I think I'm running a little short on time. So what I wanted to say that the practice does essentially is it gives you a very subtle way, the senses start engaging in a very subtle way with the world, and you start receiving more information and you don't filter it out. So the way you experience your life kind of becomes like an artwork, actually. Like I had this experience once when I visited the Tate Museum, where I saw a Rothko painting, which I had seen several before. And I actually started crying when I saw the painting, and I never really understood why. Like I just thought, I chalked it down to I was feeling emotional in that moment. And then I had a similar experience when I went to the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, and a couple of other situations as well later on. But it was really surprising to me that in the first few weeks of doing the somatic practice, I revisited that feeling that I had in front of these artworks. And I think what happens is that, you know, when you start feeling truly or like authentically without filtering, and you're truly open and able to receive the feeling that comes to you, you know, you experience it in a completely different way because you're not pushing it away. And so for me, this actually took the movement practice, the Abhyas somatic practice, it really opened it out and didn't limit it to just a dance practice or a performance practice. It actually made me think of my whole life as an artwork, or like as the experience of life as being experiencing art. Because as I said in the beginning, if you think of your body as the medium through which you experience your life, and you have a practice that helps you fine-tune the state of being that your body is in, the way you receive information in your life completely changes. And so, I mean, I was having this conversation with Navtej earlier about the difference between affect and aesthetic. And I had not quite sorted out how I think about this. But what I do want to say is that a lot of what happens to me doesn't seem quite as affective in an uncontrollable way. I feel almost like life has become this, I mean, without overly romanticizing it, because it's not like my life is like that all the time. But there are moments, like very simple moments sometimes, where you suddenly feel deeply embedded in yourself, in time, in moment, and you have this like transformative minute, which happens when you're in front of really good art, whether it's like a performance piece or a painting. You know, people experience it in movies sometimes, but for me, when I come to the practice, doesn't happen every time, but very often, I would say like 75% of the time, I do end the practice with this feeling of feeling transformed. And I think that this is a really revolutionary thing, because it means that you can apply this aesthetics, or the idea of like you can, like your life becomes an artwork. I don't know how else to say it. And your engagement with the world becomes very calibrated and fine-tuned, and you're open. So that's that. But I wanted to end by reading a couple of things that I've written quite recently. Oh, wait. So actually what I wanted to finish with, on the 29th of May, 2019, which is also at this retreat, Navtej said, "What goes beyond an aesthetic or a poetic experience?" And he said it was a fulfilling experience. And what I'm beginning to find now after 4 years of consistent practice is a kind of fullness or a kind of fulfillment when I do the practice, when I tend to my body, when I sit down with it and listen to it, see it, feel it, and like let it say what it needs to say. I get this like feeling of fulfillment. So on the 24th of April, 2020, this year, I wrote, "There's a memory of wholeness embedded deep within my body, and the access to that wholeness begins in the skin. Not on it, but in it. It's as if the echo of that wholeness, or the memory of it, is etched straight into the cells of the skin. It's like the skin is hungry for it, or rather, that the body is hungry for it, but the skin shouts the loudest." And then on the 28th of April, so my responses went from being the way that I was reading them earlier. Now this is the kind of thing I write after a session's finished, and I find it quite interesting how the engagement with the word has changed over time as well. So on the 28th of April this year, I wrote, "In the midst of my atmosphere, I can see myself so clearly. Things part, the blades join, and I feel lifted, buoyant, and free." So yeah. So that's for me the essence of the practice. Thank you.